Anyone who causes my son to walk will marry me." The words rang with a chill breeze in the grand hall of the mansion, stopping the room dead as if with a specter.
"Oh, don't know, lad."
A widower businessman, an owner of a vast fortune, had issued the challenge with a firm voice, as if it were a rigid contract. His 6-year-old son had been confined to bed in a wheelchair for months after a horrific accident. The boy had failed to take even one step since then. No one dared to answer. No one, that is, except one. Clara, the unassuming housemaid, who had toiled unseen in the mansion for years. Always forgotten, always invisible to the eyes of the family. "And if I succeed?" she had asked in a trembling but resolute voice. Every look rebounded off of her in shock. The audacity of her statement was assumed as if it was an unforgivable sin. Alejandro's sisters, dressed in their party dresses, burst out with scornful laughter. "Please," one of them jeered. "What could a servant possibly know of medicine or of rehabilitation?" But Clara never lost her eyes. She held firm because she knew something they did not. She had been secretly collaborating, with 4 weeks, trusting him when others would not. That night, after the shocking announcement, Clara slipped silently into room. The boy sat waiting for her, his eyes shining with expectation. "Do you think I can actually do it, Clara?" he whispered. She took his tiny hands in hers and answered sternly and tenderly. "It's not a question of what I believe. It's a question of trusting you. I'll be with you every step of the way." For the first time in months, there was a smile. On face. A frail smile, but one with hope. Clara understood that she could not give miracles, but she could give him what the world had stolen from him: faith and courage. The next day, Don Alejandro watched him passively from a distance. He watched as Clara guided the boy in the garden, summoning him to stand up from his chair. His sisters witnessed disgust, shaking their heads. "This is a waste of time," one of them muttered. But Alejandro did not turn aside. Something inside him told him that he should hear her out. For the first time, he doubted that his test had been anything other than a challenge. Clara never vacillated, however. She took hands every afternoon in the garden and pushed him forward. "One more step. Don't look down. Look at me." The boy, sweating and with tears brimming in his eyes, clung to her as if she alone sustained him. And then there was the day it happened. Stood, unaided, shaking, but standing. Alone for a few seconds, the wheelchair remained parked beside him. Alejandro, who saw it, stared in amazement and shock with eyes open wide. The teasing laughter of his sisters froze on their lips and turned to stunned silence. No one had ever believed the lad could ever return, least of all because of the devotion of a housemaid. Alejandro took a step forward, his voice trembling. This is impossible." But there stood his son on unsteady legs, fighting to stay on his feet. Clara assisted him, softly urging, "You can do it, trust me." The tableau shook the mansion like an earthquake. Alejandro's heart was racing. He had vowed something publicly that he never thought anyone could ever accomplish. But Clara had accomplished the impossible. She asked for nothing. Not with any arrogance or any sense of entitlement. She merely touched the boy's cheek with tears in her eyes. And in that moment, everyone knew the truth. Something impossible had been made possible. The subsequent days were strained. Alejandro's sisters began to push him relentlessly, afraid his pride would make him stick to his vow. "Can't be serious about marrying her," one of them barked. "She is a servant." "What will people say about our family?" Still Alejandro said nothing. His silence was more disturbing than words. Inside him, honor battled with the crushing weight of societal expectations. He stood in the hall, motionless, looking at his son still wobbling before the wheelchair. The air was dense, thick with anticipation. His sisters looked at him coldly, waiting for him to dismiss the incident as coincidence or happenstance. Yet deep inside, Alejandro was aware that it was not possible to deny what had happened. Clara had achieved what the most expensive doctors and latest treatments had failed to do. She had given his son back his strength, his courage, and most importantly, his hope. At that moment, Alejandro was aware this was no longer regarding a rash promise or his pride. This was concerning, giving his son the chance to walk again. Later that night, sitting alone in his office, Alejandro whispered his own words to himself repeatedly. "Whoever makes my son walk will marry me." He never imagined anyone would survive, much less someone like Clara. But the memory of eyes shining with tears of happiness and courage struck him like a blow. For the first time in years, Alejandro felt vulnerable. "What kind of man am I if I break my word before my son?" he growled, knowing that apart from the opinion of society, the ultimate challenge came from those innocent eyes that now looked up at him with respect. His sisters didn't lose any time the next morning. They picked him up in the Great Hall and surrounded him with what they called advice, but was really a threat disguised as concern. "That woman doesn't belong in this family. You'll tarnish our reputation and besmirch the memory of our parents if you marry her," the eldest said, frowning. Alejandro said nothing. He listened to them in silence until he raised his hand, commanding them to be quiet. His voice rang firm. "The family honor is nothing if we can't keep our promises. And I made a promise to my son." Silence. So cutting, so thick that none of them dared to respond. The mansion turned into a war zone of stares from that moment forward. Frosty glares, mumbled arguments, unspoken threats. But Clara went about her work silently. She hoped for nothing and asked for nothing. The only thing she wanted was to see grow stronger. And he did. Each day the boy could walk more steps and stand longer on his own without support. Confidence was returning to him, a sparkle in his eyes that had been gone for months. Alejandro walked into the garden one afternoon and halted. There was his son, running, stumbling, unsteady, but running into Clara's open arms. Laughter burst from the child's mouth, pure and clear. Alejandro's throat tightened. His son was not only walking again. He was smiling. He was alive. That laugh was worth more than any fortune he had ever acquired. At that point, Alejandro knew that his mind was already decided. The following Sunday morning, he called everyone to gather at the grand staircase. He was dressed impeccably, as if for a business meeting, but with a new sparkle in his eyes. He was not the cold, calculating businessman anymore. He was a man ready to break the chains of tradition and pride. Clara emerged holding hand. His sisters exchanged angry looks, pursing their lips. Alejandro drew a deep breath and declared in a strong voice, "Clara, you accomplished what nobody else believed could be done. You brought my son back to me, and in doing so, brought myself back to me. If you'll accept me, I want you to be my wife." Chaos erupted in the room. Gasps, murmurs, objections. Ejections shrieked in outrage. Guests had their hands over their mouths in astonishment. And then, cutting through all the chaos, was voice. Clear, firm. "Papa, I want you to marry her. She believed in me when no one else did." The innocence of a child, the power of truth. His words fell like an axe in the hallway and shut everyone up. Alejandro's eyes teared up. At that moment, he knew. The choice was not his to make. It was also the little boy who had learned to walk again because of Clara's love. Clara, her eyes welling up with tears, paused. She lowered her eyes as though she was not worthy of what she was being asked to do. And then, with tears glistening in her eyes, she raised them toward Alejandro and, "I'm not sure if I'm the woman you expect," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But what I do know is that I'll always be here to take care of you, and I will never get tired of fighting for this child." Alejandro took a step closer. He clutched her hands in his voice charged with the resolve of a man who had at last found his path. "You are the only woman who can restore my son's life. That is sufficient." Alejandro's wedding had turned out nothing like many had envisioned. There were no over-the-top displays, no overflowing luxuries. Alejandro had determined there was no necessity to impress anyone. It was close, unadorned, authentic. Clara approached him in a simple gown, her presence radiating a dignity that eclipsed all richness. And then there was the moment that reduced everyone to tears. In his tiny blue suit, bore the rings down the aisle step by painstaking step. Gasps rippled through the room. Eyes brimmed over. That image, the boy who had defied despair, the woman who had guided him, the father who had performed honor rather than pride, would never leave anyone's memory. The mansion felt different after that day. The chill that had once filled its halls gave way to warmth. Laughter occupied spaces where there had once been silence. The words became genuine, full of love instead of pride. No longer was Clara Alejandro's wife. She was the post upon which the family leaned, not pride, but love. Cherished in his heart the unerasable memory that he had walked again because someone had trusted him when the world had turned its back. Alejandro learned something he would never forget. True richness isn't what you have, but what you respect, what you share, and what commitments you make. Years afterward, as guests entered the mansion, they could still sense that the story carved into the walls whispered in each corner, a vow made in hubris, a devoted servant, a boy's triumph, and a family rebuilt not of wealth, but of honor and love. For appearance is fool, but respect and honor can never be bought.